Good evening and welcome. We're excited to have everybody here. Tonight we have Jen Miller and Lisa Wurm from the League of Women Voters, and Catherine Turcer and myself, Mia Lewis from Common Cause. We're all here as part of Fair Districts, and we will be presenting to you tonight. And we have our wonderful helpers, Tiffany Brombalski, Michael Barron, Trevor Martin is on here as well, and you guys are all part of the family at this point too, so we consider you part of the team, all working together. And so we have had a couple of previous trainings, and we will, if you probably have seen them already, but we'll be sure to send you links both to the redistricting training that we did January 19th, and also to a first Speakers Bureau training that was really about procedure, about how it works. And our purpose tonight is really just to go through what we would consider a basic slide presentation, and go through each slide and make sure that you guys are comfortable with each slide. And the way that we're going to do that is to have you ask questions about the slide that's in front of you. And we're going to ask you to use the chat to do that, so we don't have a lot of turning on and off of muting and videos and different stuff. So we'll ask you to ask your question in the chat, and we're asking you to stick to the current slide, because a lot of questions, of course, will be covered later on in the presentation. And what Catherine is going to do in the first part of the presentation is, so at the end of each slide, we'll kind of pause and say, are there any questions from the chat? And Catherine will say whether or not there are questions from the chat. And then while Catherine is presenting, Jen will ask questions. And any questions that you pop into the chat that aren't relevant to the current slide, we'll try to answer later. And we'll also try to have time at the end for additional questions. So we're going to run through the whole presentation, a kind of demo presentation. And then at the very end, we'll say next steps. So I'm just going to get started right away. We're going to go to the first slide of the demo presentation, and Lisa Wurm is going to take the first couple of slides. So when you have questions, remember, put them in the chat, but try to focus them on the actual slide that's in front of you.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Lisa Wurm. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Ohio. So I'll just be taking us through the first few slides here. Not a ton of questions probably, but hey, all questions welcome. So this is what we consider a great first slide. Just kind of gives the intro. It has people. It explains what you're doing. So something just simple and engaging, and has the Fair Districts logo. So any questions about that slide? I should check the chat. Okay, so then Peter wants to know where the photo was taken. Mia,
I think it's in front of the Supreme Court during the argument of the Russo versus Common Cause, which is a gerrymandering case, which unfortunately went the wrong way, but hey.
We were there. So this next slide is meant to be an intro slide, so we think it's good to just explain right off the bat who we are, since there's multiple coalitions working on redistricting. So this is just meant to explain very simply what this, collaboration is, kind of what we're about. It's a great place to say that we're nonpartisan, and we're focused on that. And also this is pictures from the previous redistricting campaigns that passed all these reforms. So that, if you wanted to know about that as well, since that was a good question from Peter. So the Philip Randolph Institute, they have been a plaintiff for they're an organization in Ohio, based in Ohio. And so they've been a plaintiff of several lawsuits from the League and others as well. So they're a civil rights organization. maybe if anyone wants to chime in
Yeah,
with
so
a
they
better
are
definition.
A. Philip Randolph Institute. There, you may know their president. The state president is Andre Washington, who's also a league member now as well, part of the Ohio Democratic Party and NAACP. They are laborers of color, so they're labor union members who are of color, and they do a lot on redistricting and have been a plaintiff with us. Antoinette asks how many are in the coalition. It's a squishy thing. We're not trying to define coalition too tightly, Antoinette, just because that can turn into a legal question, actually. So we're just saying, we just wanted to throw out there that we have, here's some of the examples of folks that are with us.
Yeah.
Here's a question that Jessica asked. She says, is there a certain way we as presenters should introduce ourselves, a way we should describe the affiliation?
Yeah, so I think you are a Fair Districts volunteer, so you can say who you are, and I think it's great for you to say a little bit about why, not taking too long, but quickly, why you care about gerrymandering or redistricting. I think what's most important out of all of it is to say that Fair Districts is the leading nonpartisan redistricting advocates and experts. And you mentioned our organizations, but yeah, I think it's great for you to go ahead and say who you are.
So the next question here, Lisa and Jen, will anyone challenge any of the organizations as being too partisan?
Well, actually, so I think that's interesting. That's why we do have a couple different coalitions that are existing in the redistricting space. There is a group of, there's kind of a more progressive group also doing redistricting work. But here's the thing, League and Common Cause are fiercely nonpartisan, and we are the leaders of this effort. So to be honest, my rules for nonpartisanship are as strong, if not stronger, than political reporters as the director of the League. So I think, it's not our job to argue with people about whether they think we're partisan or not. But it is our job to just point out that we are nonpartisan and that we stand up for all voters.
All right, here's another question. Robert wants to know, are there any conservative organizations in the coalition?
Well, I think so here's again, Robert, what I would just say is we don't really have groups that would be considered, I guess the Council of Churches is, but again, that's super neutral. So we certainly will have allies and partners, and even some of you on this call are conservative, but we ourselves are not. We do not take any stances on candidates. We do not take any stances on parties, and we really work just to advocate for voters. One thing I'm worried a little bit. I want us to keep going, but we've got a lot of slides.
Yeah, we got it. I think the idea is let's just do I think the questions will be really good on the content so that you get comfortable with the content. The stuff that's more just about this, let's just try to go through it if we can. And then, we'll have a little bit of time at the end as well, hopefully for general questions. So I'll move on to the next slide. Lisa.
Okay. So it's good to always start with an agenda, just so people know what to expect, just like we did tonight as well. So this is how the presentation is laid out. So you can just briefly go over this part, and just it helps just people know what to expect and how long the presentation might be. And then, so those are just your brief intro slides, because sometimes, you'll be asked to give a 40-minute presentation or a 20-minute presentation, so you can move through quickly. That's what these slides are kind of meant to do as well. So then after this comes more detailed about the actual process. So Mia's going to take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Michael, yes, we can add slide numbers. That's fine. And yeah, so now we begin the actual content of the presentation. And this is just, again, very, very brief, just to explain what apportionment is, that we have 435 congressional districts in the US, and that every 10 years, we have to figure out how many congressmen each state gets. And so apportionment is that thing. Apportionment is figuring out how many congressmen go into each state. But redistricting is moving around the lines to make sure you have equal population. So Catherine, were there questions there about this slide that we want to answer?
The question we have here, apportionment applies to any and all congressional districts, correct?
Yes, any and all congressional districts, exactly. And for example, this year in Ohio, we are very much expecting that we will, when the districts are kind of doled out according to population, we will end up with 15 instead of 16. That won't be settled until the end of April, but that is our expectation. But we don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's really the redistricting and the drawing of those lines that's kind of the meat of the conversation.
So there are
Kathy?
still a few questions that like one, why is 435 the magical number? Like why 435?
I mean, it just is like, it is not impossible. It isn't specifically in the Constitution. So in theory, that could be changed, but that is, that is the number that there is. And there is an apportionment requirement in the Constitution, yes. All right, moving on. So no apportionment is required for Ohio House and Senate districts because those numbers are set in our Constitution. We're always going to have 33 senators and we're going to have 99 representatives. And we'll tell you more about the rules for that a little bit later on. But we don't, that's luckily those numbers do not change every 10 years. So then we move on to, I'm hoping it's okay to move on. We move on to, well, what is redistricting? We've figured out what apportionment is, but what is redistricting? And basically redistricting is simply the process of redrawing district lines to make sure that to account for the fact that people move, people are born, they die, there might be an economic turn down in one area and people move to go and get jobs in another area. And when you started out with equal representation, equal population in different districts, over time that shifts, and you need to rejig things and redraw those lines in order to make sure that the districts are equal again. And we do that every 10 years after the census. And yes, that's in the Constitution, that we count everybody and we figure out where everybody is, and then we redraw those lines so that each representative, whether it's in Congress or in the Ohio Senate or in the Ohio House, or even in city councils and things like that, that each representative is representing roughly the equal number of people to other representatives. So this is a pretty good image just to show how that works. Any specific questions about that? I don't see any. Yes.
I think there's a process question. I'll just jump in. So yes, we do have notes on the slides. So when you get the slides, we'll encourage you to actually maybe print them off so you get the notes too. And yes, Nancy, these are the slides that we are handing over to you as speakers for our Speakers Bureau.
Right. And this is kind of our long version, and we will make a shorter version because we recognize that sometimes people will ask you to come and speak just for 20 minutes or something like that. So how equal is equal? Well, it's not equal to the number, to the one person. It's equal within, it's roughly equal, maybe within 1%, or it's not specified for congressional districts. It is specified for Ohio legislative districts, if I'm not incorrect. But it does not have to be exactly equal to a person.
And if we go to this level of detail in our presentations of what equal means and all that, this presentation will be 4 hours long.
Yeah.
This is not designed to be a legal interpretation and go into those kinds of details. It's designed to give a basic overlay. So you do not need to be an expert on these wonky kinds of things. Roughly equal is good.
I forgot to say at the beginning, you do not need to be an expert. We meant to say that on every slide. We want to encourage you to just feel that you can share the importance of the fact that we're drawing the lines this year, and we want to engage people, and we want to get them activated, and we want to get them to participate. But we're not trying to, honestly, like I've been studying this for a couple of years. I feel like I know nothing compared to Catherine and Jen, who've been studying it for many years. And again, you could study redistricting and all of that for like 30 years and still have more to learn. So do not feel that you need to know all of these things at all. We just want to make sure that you feel vaguely comfortable and that you can answer basic questions and you understand the slides. And then there's always opportunity to get questions answered from us or
Real
others.
quickly, I just wanted to say, so just anticipating questions we get. Here's the thing, is that I don't want us to get into the super nitty gritty legal interpretations either, because if you all as our speakers like say something a little bit wrong, that could get used against us at some point. Like, we don't want to get into the details of exactly what equal population is. So I think you just want to say roughly equal. There are slight differences in how that's defined for federal and state maps, and that's okay.
And I'm moving on. Okay, so we are going to deal with census later. I saw a question about that. We'll cover that later. This is a slide that is just has a representation that very basically explains gerrymandering. We're going to replace it with another one which has cats and dogs on it, which my friend is working on as we speak now. But the point about this is to just emphasize that the people who draw the lines have a lot of power. They have a lot of power to create districts that will benefit themselves. And so, if you're imagining two groups of people, yellows and greens, there are fewer yellows than greens. You could draw the lines in such a way that you have perfect representation. That's number one here, the second diagram. But if you give greens the power to draw the lines, they can do this thing that's called cracking. And we do want you to know the terms packing and cracking. So in 2, they're cracking, they're taking the yellows and they're putting a little smidgen of yellow in each district. And what the result of that is that actually no yellows are elected and 5 greens are elected. And so that's obviously very unfair. And obviously the greens have drawn the map there. Oops, sorry. But if you look at the next slide, you'll see that obviously the yellows have drawn the lines, because even though they're minority, they've ended up with 3 representatives and the greens only have 2. And how have they done that? They've done that by packing. They've taken 2 districts and they've essentially decided to forfeit them, and they've squished extra votes, extra voters into those districts. And then the greens only end up with 2. And you can see this in Ohio. You can see District 3 has been packed with Democrats. District 12 has been, the Democrats have been cracked, and a few of them have been thrown in and essentially to neutralize their votes. So we'll have another image here with cats and dogs. But we do want you to understand, basically that gerrymandering is drawing the lines in a way that benefits you. It gives you power, and you achieve gerrymandering by packing and cracking. Now, Catherine, any questions that I need to answer?
I think you're good to go to the next slide.
All right, excellent. And so gerrymandering is, this is a slide about the origin of the term. It came from our friend Elbridge Gerry, who was around from the beginning. And he drew that first gerrymandered district, which folks, the political cartoonists of the time thought it looked like a salamander. And so they called it a gerrymander. But of course, gerrymandering back then is nothing like gerrymandering now, because, every year the computer programming, mapping software gets more sophisticated and more powerful. And you can kind of figure out to the house, where, how you can draw lines that will bake in your own power. Any questions about this slide? No. All right. So I think I'm done, and Jen is going to take over.
So one of our goals is to make sure people understand what has happened so far so that they are hopefully inspired to act. So we will be talking about how Ohio has gerrymandering problems and what that looks like. So this really is our current congressional map. It was designed to guarantee that 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats would be seated every election, no matter what. We have that no matter what. And again, how do we do that? Again, by cracking and packing. So that's why the shapes are super odd. That's why we have really weird sprawling districts. That's why, we have, just you see really decisions that were made that don't make sense if you know the communities that are being represented, if you know the geography, and it was all designed really to guarantee that 12-4 margin. One of the things that I think is great to point out is that that actually hurts every voter. So even if you are a Republican and you live in this state that has a supermajority, or you're a Republican and you're represented by a Republican, it still harms you because lawmakers, once they're in office, don't have to listen to you if they know that their outcome is guaranteed. And I think we want to talk about it in those terms. One of the things we talk about is that the majority party, the party that has more seats, is the party that will want to continue to secure their majority. It's kind of human nature to want to rig the game for your team. But that's why we need nonpartisan voter advocates like ourselves who have been fighting gerrymandering since in Ohio, when the Democrats were the map makers and had gerrymandered too. We always stand up for everyday voters. Let's go to the next slide. So again, the idea of predictable results, that is a term that we have, that League and Common Cause have put out research about. The idea is that we already know before we get to the general election who's going to win seats. The results are predictable. It doesn't even matter if there's a big wave year of Republicans or a big wave year of Democrats, the seats stay the same for the most part. And what we see here is that you can look at how many folks voted versus how many seats that got. So you see that this is unfair, right? So 40% of the votes in 2016 were Democrats, but far less than that are actually 25% of the seats. And that is because that's been rigged. Sure, we can probably update for 2020. It's basically the same, Mark. I don't know that it matters. That's the point, actually, is that for an entire decade, we've had guaranteed results. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so then we wanted to give you some examples of districts and regions, and we just picked out 3, and you probably remember we talked about this. I made this only one slide this time, but you can decide to keep each of these. Okay, sorry. You can decide. I'm sorry, I just am getting distracted. I need to shut the chat so I can talk. You can decide if you want to use all 3 of these slides I'm going through now, or if you just want to use one. Some of that might depend on your time. District 9 is one that affects Clevelanders and Toledo folks, right? And so the concept of this particular map is to show, one, how weird, this slide is how weird District 9 looks and how difficult it was, how every twist and turn was designed to achieve that partisan outcome. Another thing that this does is, so approximately 711,000 people per congressional district last decade. And this shows that actually we didn't need to split Toledo or Parma or Lakewood. These are all the communities that get split into multiple congressional districts. Why? Again, to guarantee that outcome. Also, another thing that we want to talk about is how hard it is for a representative to truly represent districts that are so oddly shaped and really aren't designed based on kind of the economies, kind of similar issues. So if, Marcy Kaptur, as she's trying to think about jobs in her district, look at how different it is, where Cuyahoga County basically doesn't have farming, and that's the number one job producer, economic driver in Ottawa. So this is just one example of those slides. And this is an example of packing. That's a very good point, is that this is an example of packing. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted to try to do Hamilton County and wanted to show kind of what happened. This is District 1. So the way that they ensured that Cincinnati would have 2 Republican districts was they really had to change Congressional District 1. Congressional District 1 historically would swing back and forth between Republican and Democrat. And so it leaned a little more Republican, but you could have folks holding seats that were one direction or the other. So what they did was they changed it. And the reason why the shape is so weird is they took the most progressive part of Hamilton County, which is the bottom left, and they made sure to add it to the most conservative county in the greater region, Warren. And that would then guarantee that that was a Republican district. So this is an example of cracking Democrats and then diluting them by mixing them with lots of Republicans. Another couple fun, interesting things, that's Xavier's basketball arena. When fans are in the basketball arena, they're in District 1. When they go to their car, which is parked across the street, that's in District 2. That shows you how hard they had to work to guarantee these outcomes. Another is this 1077 West North Bend Road, where you see that the green is all District 2 and the unshaded is District 1. So here is an individual who is surrounded by an entirely, their neighbors on all these sides are, 3 sides are in a different district. Let's go to the next slide unless we have questions. And then I thought it made sense to do Congressional District 15, because if you're in Southeastern Ohio, this is a slide to tell a story. If you're in Central Ohio, this is a slide to tell a story. I'm actually showing you in this image the 2, what 15 looks like in the previous map, which only covered 3 counties, versus our current map where it covers 13. District 15 was initially used to kind of, again, was a little bit swingable. It leaned a little bit, it would sometimes be Democrat or it would sometimes be Republican. They did not want that. They wanted to be able to secure always that this seat would be Republican. So they, out of all those that they added 10 counties. 9 of them are heavily Republican oriented. Again, so this is how you crack the heavily Democratic areas of Franklin County so that they do not have voting power anymore. And this is just a good slide underneath. If you look at the old 15th, if we looked at how the votes fell for Obama versus McCain and the old 15th versus the new 15th, you see that cracking, right? You see the dilution of votes for the Democrats. Are there questions, Catherine?
Sorry, I'm coughing. No questions, although there's an interesting point that Gary Gale pointed out, so check out the chat. Not for you, Jen, but for other folks.
Okay. All right. Well, and it says in its original iteration did not go that far west. It was changed to help Kaptur when they moved 50,000 voters that had been represented by Kucinich. So, yep, I think the point from Gary Gale is basically that part of what happens is when we lose seats, then we have to decide what to do with incumbents. And there was a decision, the District 9 was really developed to force Kucinich and Kaptur to have to run against each other.
So, and here's another question, which I thought was interesting.
I'm happy to take this one. about where the maps were drawn?
Were they drawn by Ohioans, or did out-of-state political consultants do the drawing?
Yeah, so there was something called a bunker where they actually had a hotel room off that was not even at the State House, where the majority party staffers were doing and consultants were making maps, and they were doing that like the members of the minority party, those lawmakers didn't see them. State House news media didn't see them. We didn't see those maps until they could introduce them in a way that they were quite sure that they could secure the super majorities, both for Congress and the State House. We'll get to, Kashi, that's a great question. We'll get to the process after a little bit more, but they did call that the bunker. A lot of our reforms are based on the things that went wrong, which is part of the reason why we want to talk about what didn't go that great last time.
We're going to move on, but just remember, you don't have to be experts. You know, basically you're just kind of introducing here, like, this is the area that we're talking about, and these are some of the things that are messed up about how these districts are. And now we're going to move on to the next process, which is an explanation of the current rules and the redistricting process. So, Catherine.
So now basically what most people at this point are like, well, okay, what's next? And you can go through this, or you can just say, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to lay out what's next, and that'll just give you the slides. You know, people can read. And so just going through, and you can say, hey, we're going to talk about the census and the courts. But you also can just say, hey, what we're going to do, and it depends especially on time. What we're going to do is we're just going to go through what's going to happen this year. And so if Mia, if you're willing to move us along, one of the things that a lot of people are talking about has to do with the census. Now, remember at the beginning, there was the discussion about the apportionment count, which is, hey, Ohio, this is the number of seats that you're going to have. This is the number of people that are going to represent you in DC. Well, normally we would have gotten that in December. Now we're going to get it at the end of April. And then the Census Bureau announced that no one should actually expect, meaning all states should not expect, their census block information, which is the data that's used for map making, until September 30th. And I think, you know, it can be really helpful just to be super clear that things are a little different this year. And part of that's the pandemic. Part of that is some, you know, behind the scenes and in the courts arm wrestling. But what is clear is things are going to be a little different this year. That doesn't mean that we should not spend our time focusing on, oh, please change to the next slide, focusing on the need for good public hearings and access to the public and public deliberation. And so I wanted to highlight this slide for you, which I'm actually not going to go through. And in most cases, you're not going to have this level of detail, but it's important for you all to in the back of your mind, know kind of what the deadlines are. I think the most important thing is if somebody says, oh, what's going on with the census, is to be able to say, well, there are deadlines actually before the census data will become available. So the map making this year is going to be different than other years. And that's one of the reasons why we're encouraging everybody to pay really good attention to what's going on. We're encouraging folks to participate in community map making, and we're doing what we can to gear up to really watchdog the process. And it's a way to just encourage people to participate. And then are there questions on this slide?
Yeah, so Catherine, we have Dale Leach is asking, who actually notifies states about the number of seats to be apportioned for Congress?
So basically what happens is the Census Bureau provides this information to the president, and then the Census Bureau sends it out to the states. You know, and so one of the things that we know is that, you know, an announcement, hey, this is the number of seats, is significantly less complicated than the you know, the census block by census block specific information. So I was going to highlight that one of the things that we don't want to do is say, okay, you have to hurry up and get the census information because we have these deadlines, because we want to make sure that we have really good numbers.
The other thing I was just going to mention is let's keep in mind that this just happened. This announcement just happened. And so we as a coalition are still looking at what our options are. But we will, as we develop our game plan to handle this, we could potentially be updating this slide. But in the meantime, I think Catherine's right. Again, what we're going to say is, yep, the census is delayed, but we're hoping that it's more quality data. And we will work with all the state fair districts, as we'll work with all the various stakeholders in the process to ensure that we still have a fair and transparent process, and that there's a lot of prep we can do now. Part of the reason this delay means that it's even more important that the public understands the processes before they start, so that they can participate once the official map making starts.
And one of the things I was going to say, I popped into the chat, or Tiffany popped into the chat, is a better way to put that. A blog post that I did, and fortunately had lots and lots of help from some national experts and from Mia, because it can be helpful to have some idea of what some possibilities are. But what I would say is it's not as likely to come, it's not as likely to come up and have long conversations about it, but it's important to kind of have in the back of your head. Now, this is the other thing, here we have this slide. We started with this presentation with a picture of the people at the courthouse on the day that they were doing the hearing with Rucho v. Common Cause. And on that day, we were so hopeful that the US Supreme Court would determine that gerrymandering is unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the court said, yes, partisan gerrymandering is terrible. But basically, the federal courts have no role. And that becomes important, one, because thank goodness that we actually took the steps that we needed to take so that we actually have rules in place to address the worst aspects of gerrymandering. And so, one of the things that can happen for people is it can get kind of depressing to talk about a compromise and all of the challenges of drawing maps. But we need to be really clear that Ohio is in a much better position than a lot of other states. The other thing that I think that's important for you all to know is that the court that will actually hear any challenges to the map is the Ohio Supreme Court. And so that is something that people are likely to ask. And I think the thing that, when people are like, oh, the Ohio Supreme Court, just remind people that the Ohio Supreme Court is more balanced than it used to be. And then any questions on this slide?
I think you can also remind them that we had no, that's fine. That's good. So, and then if someone asks you, are we going to sue? You just say, that's above your pay grade. You could joke. The point is that what we need to do is maximize our opportunity now to get fair maps, but the Fair Districts Coalition will always we'll use all methods possible, legal methods possible to stand up for voters. And so that may be something we consider, but it's not something you have to answer.
Yeah, Gary noticed something, which is, when we are talking about gerrymandering, we are talking about partisan gerrymandering. We're specifically talking about one party maximizing their advantage and disadvantaging the other political party. However, racial gerrymandering, is in fact unconstitutional. And so we should need to be pretty clear about that. The other thing, this slide is pretty simple, and I mostly included it because sometimes people get what contiguous is, or like, hey, everything needs to be all together. They get that. They don't necessarily get that the districts can't be, they have to actually be continuous. And like, sometimes you're like, well, what is continuous? And the best way to understand that is to think about things as like a donut. You can't do this kind of circular thing around. So what would be a good example? If you in the middle of a county created a district and then tried to put one around it, like a donut, you're not allowed to do that. And so, yes, it's important to think about, oh, we have these rules about not separating, splitting counties, and we have those kinds of rules, but it's important to realize that there are rules about things not being continuous. Then it's also important to think, just generally, sometimes what happens is you're having a presentation And what you're doing is you're basically, we're asked to come and tell people how to get active. And sometimes, just saying, hey, the rules focus on, public hearings, and they focus on keeping the counties, cities, townships whole as much as possible. There's specific rules, but this is a good way to understand it. For folks that are like, well, public hearings, what does that mean? In the Ohio Constitution, there are 3 public hearings after a map has been proposed for state legislative maps. So that's Ohio House, Ohio Senate. And then it's also important to know there are 2 for after congressional maps have been, proposed or introduced. Now, what's important about that is there will be additional hearings. And that's because of Ohio's sunshine law, in this particular case, the area that's called the Ohio Opens Meeting Rules. And so as we're thinking about the public hearings, it will make a bigger difference because we in the Constitution, it says we're going to do it afterwards. And the afterwards is important because in 2011, they front loaded all of these hearings rather than having an opportunity to actually have us as the public really comment in a significant way on the maps that they were proposing or considering.
I also just wanted to throw out there that we could add something about that fair districts will inform our supporters when those are coming, something like that. We don't know when the hearings are yet, and we have minimums of 3 and 2, but we will definitely want to have more. So maybe we could add something to this slide about following us on social media or becoming members, or maybe we do that later. But we definitely will we'll need to keep it vague for most of our presentations, but that will be how we want them to join our mailing list and things.
So any questions that I should answer?
No, I think we've got them. There is certainly, yeah, we're going to get to where the reforms are. We're just not there yet.
And some of them are just suggestions of things to include in the presentation. An example of compact as opposed to small, and that's fine. And I think let's go on and we'll,
and for folks who are confused by continuous district, the best way to understand it is you can't make donuts. And you were absolutely right. This is not a scientific or a mathematical definition of continuous. It's just the definition that is in the Ohio Constitution. And at the time, it was very confusing, but they were concerned about doing this kind of donut thing.
And Mindy Hedges, as we get closer to hearings, it'd be helpful to let them know so they can attend or testify. Yes, but the point is that we're not going to know those for 99% of these presentations. And so that's why we want folks to become members, join our mailing list, follow us on social media, and we'll make sure we have a slide about that at the end.
Okay, and just remember, guys, as we get into these slightly more complicated rules, you don't have to be experts. You really, just like Catherine said, you just have to know that we have better guidelines and rules and guardrails in place now to make sure that we get rid of the worst of gerrymandering. So now we're going to head into some of these more specifics about the rules, the new rules.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to focus on Ohio House and Ohio Senate maps. So the state legislative districts are interesting because the Ohio Senate is basically made up of 3 Ohio House districts. Basically, they're nested in. So like, just think of the like a Russian doll that has 3 House districts inside them. And this is very important. The rules for the state legislative districts are very strong. There is a strong anti-gerrymandering rule. No plan, in other words, read it as no map shall be drawn to favor or disfavor a political party. And there are rules for representational fairness. Now, representational fairness can get a little bit confusing, but the best way to understand it is that you look at 10 years of statewide elections, and then an average is kind of created for the partisan index. Like, at the end of the day is, and it's a little bit complicated, but you're talking about, is Ohio 55% Republican and 45% Democrat? Well, if it's 45% Democratic, then as you look at the map as a whole, about 45% of those districts should lean to the left. And if 55% of them are Republican, you know, all the way across the entire state, well, then those districts, 55% should lean Republican. Now, it's a way to make sure that you back up, you know, that anti-gerrymandering rule, because it's a way to make sure things are just a little bit fairer, but that's what representational.
Can I try? So it's like there's a pie. It goes back actually to those pies. And so roughly the same percentage of seats should be allocated to the amount of votes for each party. We say roughly, it will not be perfect, right? Because there are natural ways that we are separate ourselves into various geographic areas depending on how we vote. So, but roughly the percentage of vote shares should be seat shares between the two major parties. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and if you are ready to move on to the next, that's great. So what I would highlight with this slide is just to let people know that the Ohio Redistricting Commission is in fact a bipartisan commission. There are more Republicans than Democrats. You know, the way that the constitutional amendment is written, it's, you know, major party, minor party. But what we do know now is that we do not yet know who the appointees will be. And in fact, for example, Bob Cupp could appoint himself. Now, the way to understand the map making, well, how do you get to bipartisan map making when most of the folks are Republicans? It's important to realize to get to a 10-year map, it does require 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And so that the best way to think about that is it requires 4 folks, but those 4 folks actually have to be half of them Republican, half of them Democratic. And then if you are willing to move along, unless there's another question.
There's a question about independence. There's a couple comments about independence and how to really address the fact that I don't know that we have a large portion of voters who are independents, but that we do have independents.
I think one of the challenges that go into this year of putting into effect our reforms is that, you know, many of us are independents. You know, I think Bill Davis just said about 50% of us, you know, I think the challenge is that we spent many years pushing for what you would think of as an independent commission. And we failed in 1981, and we failed in 2005, and we failed in 2012. And the reforms that we got put in place are a compromise, a bipartisan compromise. And so if somebody says, well, there are lots of different better ways to do this, you are absolutely right. There could be better ways to do that. We're going to learn from this 2021 map making. But we are so fortunate that we are not a state like Wisconsin that has no rules and it's the wild, wild west. And just
the other thing I would just say is we do want to talk about how gerrymandering hurts every voter. And so while the map makers have these very partisan goals, I think the way you can say that is that actually most Ohio voters are not as partisan as the maps, right? That they a lot of us like maybe mix our ticket. You know, even if we are technically registered with one party or another, we don't necessarily vote the entire ticket that way. But I would just say that what we want to talk about is having these maps. If we can get some of these reforms and the maps are more fair and some of these districts will swing back between Republicans and Democrats, that actually might benefit the independents the most, who are ones who decide to swing back and forth. But more than that is when politicians are guaranteed their seat, they don't have to listen to us.
Yeah. Should I move ahead, Catherine?
So I was going to highlight, Jean had a question for the state legislative maps. Those are created by the Ohio Redistricting Commission. And so now we're going to move to congressional redistricting maps. So the best way to understand this and the best way to explain it, it's bipartisan map making. There are limits on splits, and this is splits of political subdivisions, which becomes a little bit complicated, but the focus is really on keeping counties whole. that notion of, if you think about gerrymandering and the wiggling and squiggling of going from, Toledo to Cleveland in the 9th congressional district, or Jim Jordan's crazy district with 14 counties, the goal is really focused on keeping counties whole. We also focus, this reform also focuses on creating greater transparency and public participation. And then if you're willing to go to the next one. So here are the rules. I think the thing that we want to be very clear with people about is the focus is on keeping counties whole. And what they did is said, no, you can't do this. This is just not something to do. But that doesn't mean, for example, just because there's a rule that says, hey, at least 65 counties must be kept entirely whole. That doesn't mean that you couldn't keep more counties than that entirely whole. It's just a way to understand, hey, you can't, this is the hard line where you have gone way beyond what should be necessary. And that's the best way to understand that. This is just Cuyahoga County. One of the things I often do when I do these talks is I try to throw in the congressional districts of the folks that I'm talking to, just because it makes it a little bit easier. So one of the things I wanted to highlight is we're going to be giving you kind of more regional slides so that it fits more to where you are. So if you're a Cincinnati person, Cleveland isn't going to really fit really well, but or a variety of other locations, and we'll make sure that you have slides that fit your location. Any other questions? Oh, David, yes, we have moved from state legislative districts by the Ohio Redistricting Commission to the congressional maps, and the congressional maps are made by the state legislature. I'll go through a little bit more information about that on another slide.
And I'll just pop in and say this picture here is just an example of things that will not be allowed in the future. So here you have one county that's divided that has parts of 4 different congressional districts in it. And so, even though the reforms were a compromise, there are a lot of really egregious things that will not be able to be recreated going forward.
And one of the things that we wanted to do with this slide was make sure that we covered state legislative and then congressional. So I gave some basic rules for both, and then there's state legislative and congressional. This is Mia's very favorite slide, and it has to do with, well, you couldn't do this again. And I think that this can be really important for folks just to highlight, yes, this is not something that you will see again. You're not going to see the crazy Summit County in 4 congressional districts, or Cuyahoga County all split up in the same kind of crazy way. Mercer County, in 3 congressional districts. I think the thing that is important is that districts are based on population. And population, population, for example, will impact, for example, Franklin County. Columbus is going to need to be split up because the population of Columbus is larger than the number of congressional districts. Now, you might say, wait a second, we do not have the apportionment data from the census. This is an educated guess based on the American Community Survey.
Catherine, yeah, there's a question there from Gary. Can you explain the meaning of split no more than twice? Does that mean it can be in 3 districts or just 2?
Just 2. So consider split down the middle.
Oops.
There are 2 splits. There are 2 of them. It doesn't mean that you can split it into 3 districts, if that makes sense.
All right, very good. Sorry.
Not to worry. So I call this the Congressional Redistricting Gauntlet. Now, what I want to be really clear about is that we don't have to go through this gauntlet. They could actually, the state legislature could actually come up with maps, the General Assembly could actually come up with congressional district lines with 60% of their members and 50% of the vote. You'll notice a deadline problem here of September 30th. But when the state legislature was trying to figure out how to do congressional redistricting reform, they wanted to be sure that they retain control They see congressional map making as their purview in the US Constitution. They did not want to give it up. And so they were like, well, how are we going to actually come to some kind of agreement? And the way that we're going to come up with some kind of agreement is we're going to identify really high goals. And then, if that arm wrestling doesn't work, we're going to hand it off. Like, we can't actually come up with a supermajority map. We're going to hand it off to the Ohio Redistricting Commission to attempt to do it with 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, with out of the 7 actually passing map. If that, arm wrestling doesn't work, then it's going to go back to the General Assembly. And the General Assembly is at that point going to have a lower number of minority representatives having to vote for it. Now, if that is just not, and it's just not coming together at all, like if it doesn't come together at all, what happens is additional requirements are put in place. So as opposed to saying, oh, you have to just, you can't divide counties and it says, hey, you can have all this number of splits and that number of splits. No, those rules are gone. What happens is there's a focus on, it's literally a rule that says you have to keep counties whole, cities whole, townships whole as much as possible. And I think that's really important because the rules that are the best for congressional map making are actually at the last stage, that 4th stage. There's also a very clear rule of prohibiting gerrymandering or drawing district line to favor or disfavor one political party and or candidate or incumbent. This becomes important because it just makes it super clear, like they absolutely have to create a district. They have to create districts that do not favor or disfavor political party. And then the kicker is this one. They have to actually create a written explanation for why it is they made every single choice. Which then, of course, if they make really bad choices, makes it much easier to actually challenge a map in court.
So a couple things. Okay.
Okay, I'm ready.
We got questions. So if stage 2 is a yes, the governor has no role, says Debbie Schmeeding. Well, actually, the governor's on the commission. So the governor still has a role, but the governor can't veto. Do you want to talk about why that is, Catherine?
So the reason that there's a possibility of a veto or a referendum is because the congressional maps will be established through legislation. So in other words, if they pass a map, the state legislature passes a map, well, we could referendum, right?
Yeah, so this is saying if stage 2 is there no referendum allowed. We can referendum.
No, there's no referendum at the 2nd stage, and that has to do with the Ohio Redistricting Commission that creates the map.
Okay. Gary Gale is saying splitting Cuyahoga County to end up with a black district on the east side, you need to go into the Cleveland eastern suburbs and go into Summit County. It's actually not true, Gary Gale. And we don't want to talk. We will have an entire presentation on the Voting Rights Act, but we don't want to talk about those nitty-gritty legal details. There are those who argue that you have to go into Summit County to comply with the Voting Rights Act. The map makers did. We don't agree actually with that interpretation, and we do have an expert who analyzed the existing congressional map and said that Marshall Fudge has never had to go into Summit County to continue to be a majority district and would still comply with the VRA. So we want to be careful about the legal things that we say. That's and we will have in our FAQ something about the Voting Rights Act and a deep dive. Debbie Dulke is saying this slide is too complicated for initial presentation on redistricting. Well, it is too complicated. It's the best we could get, Debbie. It is
It's actually really helpful just to have the image. You don't need, we're going into the explanation for you guys, but I would not recommend going into the explanation when you're doing a presentation. I would just say, you know, there are different stages in the process as they arm wrestle and they try to make sure that they can get a map, and, you know, there are different requirements, but it's useful to have it just so that you kind of see how it works out. But we really do discourage you going into a lot of the details. Again, we just want to make sure that they know that there are rules, there are better guardrails than there used to be. There are requirements that have to do with transparency, keeping counties together, bipartisanship, those kinds of things. And then just kind of move on.
So one of the things that we should be really clear about, it has to do with it says stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Well, if you've wrapped things up, you could wrap things up at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. Being really clear that this is about trying to come up with bipartisan maps, and that they called them silos during the legislative discussions rather than stages. I thought silos is kind of confusing, which is why we use stage, but you never have to get to stage 4. You know, anywhere along here, we could get an agreement.
And I think it's already 8 o'clock, so I think
we're going to go on, and I'm going to jump in with this next section, which is really, this is really the point of you guys giving these presentations. It's to bring more people, activate more people, and get more people involved. And we will, you know, as things change throughout the year, we will update this if there are hearings or they should be writing letters to the editor or whatever it is, we'll kind of update this. But we want to let people know that there are lots of ways to participate. They can participate by staying informed, by spreading the word. They can participate like you guys as being part of the Speakers Bureau, or even just finding groups that want presentations. That's a really important thing as well. They can participate as watchdogs, holding their legislators accountable, and also the Ohio Redistricting Commission. There are things that we want to pressure them on now, and there will be all the way throughout the process. They can participate in our community map making program as facilitators. We are encouraging communities to draw maps so that we have better information from the ground up about where those lines should be drawn when they do need to be drawn somewhere. That's very important. And then eventually we'll be doing a map making competition for actually drawing whole districts. That will have to wait until the census data arrives. And then we have another team, which is a transparency team, which is learning how to pressure for information. We have a training coming up on March 16th about that. And so we really want at the end of a presentation for everyone to feel that they have a way to get involved, even if it's just making a call to their legislator, or, you know, telling a friend that this is the year that we're going to get new maps, and that they can participate. So the next steps, I'm going to just go on. So this is a quick timeline for participation. So right now we're in the kind of winter, spring. We're doing our tutorials. We're getting our Speakers Bureau up and running, training people on the community map making. We're doing public pressure for virtual testimony and increasing public hearings, et cetera. And then later on, there'll be the map making competition, and then public hearings. So we're going to answer a few of these questions now. Dennis, we are actually not encouraging to use your own slides, or at least we'd like to take a look at them, because as Jen said, it's really important for us to make sure that just from a kind of legal point of view, that everyone's kind of saying the same thing and we're sharing accurate information. So that's our preference, is that you use our slides, and we're happy to adapt them and give you the data and, you know, other resources that you need. But that's the way we'd like to do that. And let's see, other And that's another thing that I want to say that actually we haven't said yet. You can help with the Speakers Bureau. You can be a part of the Speakers Bureau without actually being a speaker. You can do what Tiffany's doing. You can jump on and help in the chat and be putting in slides or answering people's questions. You can help by finding groups that want presentations and helping them to get set up. So Jerry, we are really imagining mostly virtual presentations, at least at this point. So it's really just your own computer, and we would provide you with the Zoom link. We will give you the slides, and there's a way to, we have a link that I think Tiffany's been putting in the chat for you to sign up to become part of the Speakers Bureau. And any of these kind of individual questions about like, well, what do I do about this actual presentation that's scheduled? We will answer. We encourage the buddy system where you can do this together with a friend. And actually we did a whole presentation on these kinds of more process questions, and we'll send out a link to that as well. I think we have some resources. We're going to share these slides. You'll have these resources. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jen for our final slide, and then we can see if there are some other questions we need to answer.
Okay, so first off, we really, I'm just going to say it again, we really want you to use our slides. And you should just know that our slides have not just been reviewed by us, but by experts at the national level, legal experts, things like that. We want you to use our slides. And I know in the past, maybe we were a little looser about that, but this year is particularly important if we do need to, unfortunately, and this is between us, well, I'm not going to say it, but we just need to stay really kind of one voice. If you do want to make some changes, yeah, we need to see those. But I also just want to be honest that we've got over 100 people on here. If all of you came with your own ideas of slides, we would not get it done. There's no way. So reminder, but we are here for you. We will continue to give you resources and help. One thing that we are all ready to do is actually join presentation teams and kind of listen in and support for your first one or two so that you feel better. Buddy system, I think like you see, like we don't do anything without buddies, right? Common Cause and League are a buddy system. And we have buddies, again, who are behind the scenes, helping with tech, helping with organization, marketing, so if you feel more comfortable speaking, awesome. If you feel more comfortable doing some of the support things, awesome. We want to know that. Make sure you mark that when you sign up. Another thing you can do is we just really need to find folks all over the place to help us book these presentations. Your next step is to actually sign up and share with us what you think. Yeah, I think that, and again, Julia Conrad is saying, worried that some are worried about minority presentation. Yeah, I think there are some types of that just make a little bit more sense, right? Like, I mean, I think we definitely thinking about our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which by the way, for League is our commitment to that is as strong as our commitment to nonpartisanship. And so if that means if it's a really interesting, diverse group, then yeah, maybe there is some changes to that, right? Or we're going to be partnering with our Somali friends, our Bhutanese, Nepali friends. The slides might be slightly different, but we don't want every individual just because they feel like it to make different slides. We want it to be because there is a good reason. But again, we are here to help you. We need to know what you need to do this better. Those of you that feel like you're just ready to go, we need you to tell us so that we can start getting these booked. There's the sign up. Pam Smith says, I'm pretty sure I already signed up for the speaker.
Yes, I have about 50 people who've already signed up, and that's fantastic. So you're good to go. And, we'll just be, once we get in those requests for speaking engagements, then we'll be reaching out to the people who have already signed up and said, hey, let's do it. Who's ready to go and partner up with someone and give their first presentation.
Couple other things is, so on March 3rd is the League State House Day. We will do a session where we deep dive into the state level process, and then we deep dive into the congressional map making process. So please join us for that. And then we don't have the VRA one scheduled yet, Catherine LaCroix, but
I think it'll be towards the end of March. We just
maybe even beginning of April, because we have our hands full. But what I would say is just make sure that you are I'm going to give you the same advice I want you to give everyone that you talk to. Follow us on social media, sign up for our email list, become a member. All of those things is the ways that we'll keep you updated, and also how the folks that you are interacting with can stay updated on the latest of redistricting.
And I just want to say thank you to everyone. Jen was saying, hey, we're here to help you. And Mia was highlighting that. But I also have appreciated all the help that you're giving to us.
Yep.
One of the things that I spend probably 3 evenings a week doing speaking engagements. And so I'm just super glad that you are joining me in this educational effort. And I also want to say thank you to the folks that just said, wait a second, there's a typo, or hey, that's not clear. It's really good to crowdsource the Speakers Bureau materials so that we can make sure that our PowerPoint and our information is as clear and accurate as possibly can be. So I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate you all.
And I think last word, if you have a group that wants a presentation, I would do 2 things actually to make sure that we don't lose track of them. I would encourage them to go to that contact form that Tiffany has dropped in. So it's the fairdistrictsohio.org/contact us, and to fill out a request for a speaker. But I would also shoot one of us an email and say, hey, such and such organization, is interested in a presentation. So just in case they don't fill out that form, we know that they are interested and maybe we should get in touch with them. But as many groups as possible can, sign up to get a presentation. We're ready to start assigning you guys.
And also we want to be, so here's another thing, recruit others to help you. So for example, if you're really a pro in talking about redistricting because you were in our Speakers Bureau before, or you're an academic or something, but you're not comfortable with the Zoom, then recruit someone to be your buddy in that, and we can get them trained and get that support. But we want as many people as possible to be involved, and we want to think about as diverse of groups as possible and presenters to be joining us.
And one just point of clarification, sometimes people ask, because you guys are nonpartisan, does that mean you won't speak at partisan organizations? And that's not the case. We'll speak at Republican groups, we'll speak at Democratic groups. Everybody should be educated about redistricting. So we're not worried if it's the Medina County Democratic Party. We're happy to go and talk about redistricting.
And in fact, I did.
Yes, in fact, you did. So, all right, guys, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and you will hear from us tomorrow with more information.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye,
So
Bill.
long, Mia.
See ya.